Pocahontas was a groundbreaking film of the 20th century. It was one of the first Disney movies after Aladdin to have a POC starring as its main protagonist. This movie was one of the turning points for Disney's filmmaking career. It showed the story of Pocahontas, a native from the early Americas around the 17th century. She hailed from the Powhatan tribe, a tribe that was colonized by John Smith, turning it into modern-day Jamestown, Virginia. It was a revolutionary movie for Disney. However, over a short period of time, people began noticing major misinformation spread throughout the movie. Scholars began looking more deeply into the matter, and within months the movie erupted into a hot topic of debate. The main question was, how accurate was Disney's interpretation of the folk legend Pocahontas? Today we will be looking at both the first and second movie, debunking myths and scenes along the way. Firstly, a short introduction to Pocahontas. The dates are quite foggy, but she was born around 1595 in the Americas. She was the daughter of Chief Powhatan, the leader of her nation. For decades ago, the tribe flourished off of natural resources and their own people. However, that would all change as the 17th century arose. When Pocahontas was 10 or 11, the colonizers John Smith and his crew arrived to take control of the village. Their main objective was to conquer and create the first European establishment in the Americas. This leads me on to the first inaccuracy, which is when John Smith was seemingly captured by the Powhatan people following the death of Kocoum. In the movie, John Smith is seemingly captured in the final scenes by the Powhatan people following Kocoum's death. This is based on the true event which happened around the time that he arrived. John Smith wrote in his diary, and I quote, that he was captured by the chief who placed his head onto rocks. He was ready to smash his head off when a beautiful girl named Pocahontas ran to his aid. This story came from Smith himself, and after scholars looked more deeply into the matter, they found out that the natives were performing an integration ritual on John in order to integrate him into the Powhatan society. So people speculate whether he was ever in danger at all. It is very much a possibility that Smith either embellished the true story or he made it all up in order to make it seem that the Powhatan people were the real enemies here and not the colonizers. Because many of the events that happened in this time were only documented by Smith, we can only speculate what truly happened. Another common misconception is that Pocahontas and Smith were lovers. In fact, Pocahontas was 10, not 18 when she met Smith. The two were never even lovers, and they barely had any connections at all. This was until Smith captured Pocahontas and held her for ransom before they left for England, but more on that a bit later. Again, the entire love made up between these two, which is a reoccurring theme in this film, was just completely made up, not based off any true events. This is something that Disney completely made up, and it wasn't even based off like a true story, nothing like that. Around 20 minutes into the movie, it is shown that Pocahontas was being forced into marrying Kocoum, who was a praised young man of their tribe. However, this was again an inaccurate representation of the Powhatan's culture. The women in their tribe are allowed to choose who they married, unlike many other nations at the time. So Disney showing that Pocahontas was being forced into marriage is completely false and culturally incorrect. The main issue with this movie is how inaccurately they show the relationships between the colonizers and the natives, and also how inaccurately they portray their culture. For those of you who are wondering, Pocahontas never actually married in the Americas with her tribe. She only married John Rolfe when she went to England, and this was after she had left her native area. Despite the last three historical inaccuracies, there is one scene in particular which actually bears quite a lot of historical significance. This is the scene in which Pocahontas sings Colors of the Wind to John Smith. The lines, "You think you own whatever land you land on, but I know every rock and tree and creature has a life, has a spirit, has a name," showcases a strong message directly linked to the Powhatan people's history. The first line, in which Pocahontas talks about how the colonist thinks wherever they land is theirs, is a message which directly links to the beliefs of the colonizers. They travel searching for new lands and conquer them, treating them as their own despite natives who have lived there for centuries. This is a theme that is shown in the movie quite well through the Jamestown colonists. As well as this, the second line, in which she sings about spirits, shows us a glimpse of their tribe's religious and cultural beliefs. The belief that everything has a spirit is a vital part to indigenous spiritual belief systems. This can give us some insight on the tribe's belief and culture, and in turn can help us to better understand the similarities and differences between the movie and real events. Throughout the movie, the Powhatan people culture isn't exactly accurately shown. However, through the song Colors of the Wind, there are some key and important messages which do actually link to the history and culture of these people. As well as the last three historical inaccuracies I stated, there is a common source of misinformation that carries on throughout the film. This source is in the way that they decided to portray the perspectives of both the Powhatan people and the Jamestown colonists. The perspectives of these two parties are not shown accurately at all. For example, the fact that Disney decided to show the Jamestown colonists as peaceful people is, in my opinion, very problematic, as it completely disregards the actual events that occurred. Not only this, but it also disputes the struggles the Powhatan people had to go through whilst under militant surveillance by John's crew. When Smith didn't get his way, he would hold natives hostage and burn down buildings. An example of this would be when John Smith actually captured Pocahontas and held her for ransom, in order for the chief of the village to obey his commands. These are just a few examples of his actions. When the English came to colonize, they were ruthless and had the significant advantage of gunpowder. This tipped the balance of power between the two parties, and the movie failed to show how significant the difference in power was. As well as this, Pocahontas the movie was also highly romanticized, and it ended with a happy ending, despite the fact that the true story of Pocahontas was not nearly a happy one. Ultimately, Disney romanticized the story of Pocahontas to the point where it bared almost no resemblance to the folk story. It also failed to show the difference in power and the extent to how brutal the English colonists were. As well as this, they were unable to show the effects that the Jamestown colonists would have on the rest of the Americas. Following this event, Britain would go on to further colonize the Americas, eventually creating the 13 colonies and transforming America into a settler colonial state. It would also have a permanent impact on the native tribes that inhabited that area. This includes the Powhatan tribe, which would die out in 1722. Essentially, what Disney did is they made up fake events to fill up the story of Pocahontas, completely disregarding the sad life that she actually had to live. Furthermore, Disney's romanticized interpretation of Pocahontas is problematic and fails to show the perspective of each party. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to never miss another upload.